Hi guys and welcome back to Is It Worth It Reviews. I'm Srboljub Stojanovic and today we are reviewing an SMSL product. We haven't had these in more than 2 months. I know you missed SMSL. So SH-X is a headphone amplifier and you can also use it as a preamp. And this time, by popular demand, I actually tested it as a preamp in my room setup. But we'll get to that part later. For now, I want to tell you that SH-X costs $6.99 and I believe this is SMSL's flagship headphone amplifier. And as you can see, it's meant to stack well with SU-X DAC that I haven't reviewed yet, but maybe in the future, I'm not sure at the moment. What you get for this amount of money, $6.99, is not really that cheap and affordable for a dedicated headphone amplifier only. Is a very sturdy, well-built head amp made out of aluminum, as you can see. The styling is a personal thing, but I quite like it. We have this black acrylic front plate, small screen in the left corner. I don't think that we actually need anything bigger because it's a headphone amp. You can select different inputs and select outputs and just follow the volume control. Oh yeah, you can also select gain. There are 3 gains: low, which actually attenuates the signal that you bring to this head amp, then medium, that is acting just like a buffer, it doesn't have any gain, and then high gain, which does add some gain. And if we look at the back of the unit, we can see that we have both RCA single-ended inputs and XLR balanced inputs. And you can also see that there are line, actually preamp outputs, once again RCA for single-ended and XLR for balanced. And these outputs, because they're pre-outs, are volume controlled by this volume knob in the front. And one thing to mention is that you have to select to use either headphone output in the front or preamp in the back. You cannot use them simultaneously. But great news is that there is a memory that remembers volume control for each of these, which is very useful in real use. And then in the front you can see 3 different headphone outputs. There is single-ended 6.35 millimeters, then balanced 4.4 and balanced XLR output. And I'm not going to dwell much on tech specs because this head amp has like insane amount of power. In low impedances, it measures in watts. It's like 10 watts in 16 ohms or something like that. I'll put that on the screen. But everything you need to know is that it has plenty of power and driving capabilities. It didn't matter if I attached high impedance headphones or really low impedance planars to it. It always worked really well. Listening to SH-X in isolation, it sounds really good. Now, this is that kind of performer that you cannot detect any shortcomings. Tonality is just really well balanced. Nothing is emphasized or lacking. So bassline is very present. It's punchy. There's very noticeable grunt and kick from the bassline. I'm always happy to report something like that because that is what makes music sound alive. And it goes both for that deep sub-bass, deep bass, and also mid-bass, where many things like drums and other instruments that give kick and snap to our music, that give rhythm to the music, are located. So all of that sounds very engaging and authoritative through SMSL SH-X. But the mid-range is very clear. The tones are clearly outlined and well focused. Detail retrieval is fantastic. And then the same thing goes for highs. They're well extended, open, highly revealing, but at the same time they do not sound edgy or harsh or piercing. no matter what kind of music I listen to. So everything in the frequency spectrum blends together really nicely. And this amp in general sounds very natural and very coherent. There are no edgy and rough parts in its performance, at least to my ears. Now, aside from tonality, I already mentioned that a little bit, dynamics is actually quite good. This is a powerful, engaging sounding amplifier. When there is a microdynamics, some snappy little things happening, it will convey that pretty well. But then if we talk about bigger dynamic swings, it will do that very nicely too. There is that dynamic headroom and breathing of the sound that's quite engaging and exciting. Now, last part, sound staging. Well, sound staging, once again in isolation, sounds pretty darn good to me. I feel that separation and layering of all instruments and vocals and basically any tone is very good. Everything has its own place in the recording and nothing is jumbled together and muddied into a mess. SH-X keeps it clean and separated, but at the same time it's not hyper focused on edges. It does not etch outlines of tones to the extent that it feels too sharp or digitally sharp or just unnatural in any way. It's just a very nicely resolving, highly focused, well separated kind of sound that feels spacious enough to me. But to find out how good actually anything sounds, I always have to compare it to some closest competitors on the market. And for that, I started with slightly older and slightly more affordable, $100 more affordable now, Topping A90D, which is the discrete model of Topping A90. And this is one pretty mighty head amp. It has great control, grip, and once again, great detail retrieval and resolution. And when you compare them directly, I would say that they're quite close. Speaking just in terms of sheer detail retrieval, they're in the same tier. They retrieve pretty much the same amount of tiny things happening in the song, in the recording. If somebody is moving around the mic or breathing in or breathing out, somebody is slowly touching the guitar before he or she starts playing, you will hear the equal amount of those micro detailing through both of these head amps. The main difference is in how they actually convey that music, how they color it tonally. And Topping here sounds more rural or flat, whereas SMSL adds just a slight hint of warmth into its mid-bass and bass section. It does sound a bit fuller and juicier because of it. But when you actually move away from tonality, you do notice that there is a little bit more dynamic liveliness and dynamic engagement with SH-X, where Topping is once again a little bit flatter sounding. It has great power, it has great control and great drive, no matter what kind of headphones you attach to it, but it feels a little bit restrained and gives some sort of dynamic flatness to the music, and SH-X is just slightly more alive and slightly more engaging sounding. Now the next comparison was with Aune S17 Pro, and this one is one beastly big and heavy head amp, and they're priced exactly the same. Now, when I started comparing them, I used S17 Pro in its 50 milliamperes mode, which is a cooler one, where this amp runs cooler and uses lower current to bias its Class A mode. And in that mode, I thought they sound almost identical. At some moments, I maybe thought that there is just a touch more snap to the sound of Aune here, but I'm not sure. I simply wouldn't dare to try to separate any of these amps in a blind test, not knowing which is which, because they sound very, very similar. Definitely same tier performance. But there's a trick. S17 Pro can engage that hotter 100 milliamperes mode, and that does influence the sound of this unit positively. It makes everything sound a little bit bigger and lusher, and tone is slightly richer. Fine texture over each tone, like the surface of a tone feels a bit more textured and detailed. And there's also a sensation of more air around every instrument or just vocal. And I like that mode quite a lot. This was, when I tested it, the best headphone amplifier that I've personally ever tested on this channel. And after this review, that will still stand, because, as I said, SMSL SH-X can compete head-to-head with S17 Pro in 50 milliamperes mode, but in 100 milliamperes mode, S17 Pro edges it, sounding tonally richer and just fuller, and it does reveal more tone texture, more air around the instruments, and it's a more enjoyable amp of the two, in my opinion. That said, S17 Pro is the bigger and chunkier of the two. It runs hotter in that 100 milliamperes mode, and I'm not sure that all of you would have enough space on your desktop and that would tolerate that much heat. SH-X is not far behind, so if you for any reason prefer this head amp, like you want to pair it visually with another SMSL deck, or you can maybe get a better deal on this one in your specific region and your budget is limiting, this is still a great amp. Now, let's move to how it performs as a preamplifier. Now, this SMSL comes with a small remote that is nothing luxurious, but it's functional, it works, it's okay. And I connected it in my main stereo setup and compared it directly to Topping A90D, serving as a preamp, and Aune S17 Pro, serving as a preamp, and then all of them compared to Bach preamp only for 950. I have to say that this SMSL works well as a preamp. Now, tonally it's right. Everything that I've said about its performance as head amp still stands. It has good, mature tonality, there's just slight warmth in the bass line and the mid bass. It's not much really, it's just enough to give good, healthy body and juiciness to the sound. And dynamics is okay, and the sound staging is decent, is nothing really to write home about. It's not completely flat, but it's not particularly wide or deep either. That said, when I compared it directly to Topping A90D as a preamp, they sounded almost the same. Now, Topping had slightly more open upper mid-range where textures are, but at the same time it had tighter mid-bass and leaner bass line, which gave the whole presentation slightly firmer and more controlled vibe, but less full and less juicy than with SMSL. But for 95%, these are much more similar than they are different. We are talking about the same detail retrieval, roughly same dynamics, and roughly same sound staging. Well, not roughly, sound staging is basically the same. Everything I just said about SMSL goes for Topping too. And lastly, S17 Pro, I will not lift it again because it's heavy. It sounded almost exactly the same as these two. Well, not completely the same. S17 Pro did present slightly more air in higher frequencies, and maybe even a little bit more of that tone texture, that husky matte texturing of tones. But on the other hand, it did sound in the mid bass and bass section maybe the leanest of them all, which is not the case when you use it as a headphone amp. In this 100 milliamperes mode, it has the fullest bass line and the widest sound staging and the richest tone timbre, but that doesn't translate to its preamp outputs. In this case, they're all exactly the same tier with slight tonal differences, and they work well. So that tonality is the biggest differentiator. If you want slightly juicier, fuller bodied tonality that adds a little bit to the sensation of good flow and musicality, go with SMSL. If you want tighter control in the mid-bass, slightly leaner bass line, and maybe a bit airier and more open upper frequencies, you can go with either Topping or Aune S17 Pro. Now, if you take this SMSL or any of these other two head amps and use them as preamps, and you compare them directly to a dedicated standalone preamp that's meant to be a preamp only, but the best in its class, something like Leather Bach, for example. That's a fantastic preamp for 950. And it's bigger than all of these, it has more inputs, and also better and more responsive control. But aside from that, it does have a better sound. It works better as a preamp. It creates bigger, and that especially goes for depth, deeper soundstage with darker background, from which tones emerge cleaner, and it just creates a more realistic virtual space behind your speakers, and it's bigger, more three-dimensional. And if you compare this SMSL or these other head amps directly to it, they will sound a little bit flat and unrefined, less spacious, and the tone flow, that continuity of tone, is not as liquidy smooth as with that great preamp. It's just a little bit rougher. And that tells me that this SMSL is a very decent preamp, like all these other good head amps, and it can double as a preamp. If you need a really good head amp, but you want to use it as a preamp too in a decent system, you can do that. But for really great systems with great imaging and great sound staging, the dedicated preamp like Leather Bach is still a better option, and it still holds advantage sonic-wise. And now we only have the conclusion. It will be short and to the point. SH-X is a beautifully built and made product. It performs great too. If you're ready to go very hot and very bulky, Aune S17 Pro is still the king of the performance, of the sonic performance in this price range. But this SMSL is not far behind. If you would prefer this form factor that's slimmer and more compact of SMSL, or simply it's visually more pleasing to you, or you want to pair it, stack it with SU-X SMSL DAC, or it's simply more readily available in your region of the world, you could still go for it, and rest assured, because you would be getting a great amplifier on its own. And that would be all for today, guys. I hope you liked it. See you next time. Bye.